Craig James Ostler is a professor of church history and doctrine at BYU. He and his wife Sandy are the parents of 7 children and 11 grandchildren. He has served as a bishop and on 3 stake high councils. He's also served for a time on a curriculum and writing committee for the young men and young women of the church. He has published extensively on the revelations of the Restoration, co-authoring a book with Joseph Fielding McConkie on that topic. He is an executive producer of the video journal Hallowed Ground, Sacred Journeys, highlighting church history as filmed on location. Additional publications have discussed the church in Salt Lake City, as well as the life of the prophet Joseph Smith and the doctrines of the Restoration. He is joined by Brady Lynn Burns, who is an undergraduate student at BYU, majoring in exercise science and in chemistry. Brady is also working as an undergraduate research assistant for Dr. Ostler. Brady and his wife Laura are expecting their first child later this year. We'll turn the time over to them.
I think we all take our turns trying to see how we can find our visuals. Get this ready for you here. All right, I'm happy to be with you today, and I do appreciate the opportunity to be able to present with Brady, who's and his wife been a travel companion of mine to church history sites the last couple of years, as well as a student and a research assistant and a friend. What I'd like to do is I want to give you a little bit of an idea of the development of humanitarian aid, first with a little foundation and background of how it is that in these last decade or two, the humanitarian aid of the church has been able to explode, and that we've been so successful in reaching those in need that it took some time to get there. Then Brady will or be able to help you understand a little better what the church is doing currently, and then I'll make a few conclusions of where we're headed in the future too. First of all, it was less than 1 year after the church had been organized that the Lord commanded the church in the law that he gave, "Behold, thou wilt remember the poor and consecrate of thy properties for their support." It wasn't much longer after that getting very specific, besides just the general need to watch for the poor, he indicated that the church was to form a business partnership, so to speak, known as the United Firm, in which they were to have a storehouse to provide for the poor, which becomes very important that if you're going to be able to provide for the poor and needy, you're going to have commodities that come from somewhere. And that I thought interesting in that revelation, in that early date in the church, he indicated that this is for a permanent and everlasting establishment and order unto my church. Now, the Lord has always given his people a charge to care for the poor and the needy. However, in this particular dispensation, he recognized if we can look forward, will never be another group of people, I believe, on the earth, nor has there been, that will have the opportunities that we do to reach out in the poor and the needy. The Lord has been very clear that we live in a day when there'll be earthquakes and famines and pestilence and scourges, man-made disasters with wars, and we finally, I believe, are arriving at a time when we can reach across the globe to share what we have with those that are in need. In doing so also, I thought it was interesting when the Lord first had given the command to have a storehouse. It began in a very small and almost inauspicious way in the Neil K. Whitney store in Kirtland, Ohio. Just a small portion of that store was utilized by Bishop Whitney as a bishop's storehouse. And so our beginnings, I don't think we could have provided the humanitarian aid that we do today back in 1831. It just wouldn't be possible, nor would it be very easy to do so. However, that has changed over the years. And Gail McGovern, who's the president and CEO of Red Cross, made this observation. She said, "The most critical thing about disaster response is moving large groups of people to the side of a disaster. And there's no one that can mobilize groups of people better than the Latter-day Saints." The Lord has been working with his people so that we would be able to learn those lessons. I've just chosen a few items that I thought highlighted that. To begin with the move to Ohio, when saints gave up their homes in New York, they had in fact, it was a man by the name of Lehman Copley who had donated or consecrated his farm. and allowed the saints to be able to move on to that farm, and learning how to move people also as the three branches of the church in New York moved into Ohio. It wasn't long after that, when the saints had been driven out of Jackson County, that the real first great mobilization to go help poor and needy took place with what's known as Zion's Camp. And of course, as they were driven across Missouri and then out of Illinois, we have had opportunities for centuries to learn how to mobilize large groups of people to be able to meet the needs of Latter-day Saints. Hopefully, then, that would permit us to have greater access to providing for the non-Latter-day Saint. When they arrive in Utah, the storehouses by that time have expanded. On the current properties of the Joseph Smith Memorial Building, excuse me, when they are here in the early pioneer era of Salt Lake City, that site was occupied by the tithing offices, the General Bishop's storehouse and stockyards, as well as the Deseret News Press buildings. And then on a smaller scale, in many local areas of where church had set up Mormon communities, storehouses provided for the poor in their respective areas, each were overseen by a local bishop and the Relief Society presidencies. Glenn Rudd, who has worked extensively with the church's welfare system, Elder Rudd noted that before 1936, we had at least 136 storehouses throughout the church in which we stored goods to provide for the poor and needy. Things began to change, of course, with the Great Depression. And it wasn't until 1936, after that great crisis, that the church or the saints began to mobilize with greater efficiency and outreach. First, because of widespread employment among the church members, it led to the centrally established welfare program. And so you may be very familiar with the calling of President, or then, well, he was president of the Pioneer Stake in Salt Lake City, so I guess President Lee was a president at the time. Harold B. Lee was called as the managing director of the church's efforts to help those that were out of employment. And then Elder Melvin J. Ballard was called as chairman of the welfare program. Major steps in seeing that there was a centralized effort toward providing for the poor and needy. Beyond that was taking place in the local congregations with bishops overseeing that effort. It led to the establishment of Welfare Square, which today has grown immensely, and with a root cellar and a little cannery that was there at the time. They also had a bishop's storehouse, a place for milk production, and of course the 178-foot high grain elevator. But note, to this point, most, if not all, of the church's efforts were focused on caring for their own. Additional large storehouses were built beyond Salt Lake City, and the church established the Desert Industry Stores, where poor could work as well as obtain needed clothing and other goods at highly discounted prices, the first of which opened in the 12th of August 1938. The next step in allowing us to be able to reach beyond, especially just within the LDS communities in the Wasatch Front, had to do with World War II. And the saints in Europe could not relieve their own suffering with just local efforts. And so most of the church's humanitarian efforts today gather, ship, and distribute aid across the globe, but it had its genesis in the church's efforts to provide for needy members of the church in Europe following World War II. You may remember well the story that's been told of George Albert Smith meeting with President Harry S. Truman and asking if he could have permission to ship goods to the saints there in Europe. Having it be responded, well, they won't be able to pay you very much for those goods. And he says, oh, we're not after money. Asking, how soon can you be ready? And he said, we're ready right now. While you have been destroying produce in the United States that's excessive, we've been storing it. And so we've learned that one of the great secrets to providing for a needy day is to store it up during the 7 years of plenty. So when the 7 years of famine come, we have means in which to provide for them. And this was especially essential as President Benson, then Elder Benson, went across Europe, meeting with the saints and having the ability with literally millions of pounds of wheat and dried beans, fruits and vegetables and milk, clothing, etc., all shipped to Europe between October of 1985 and the end of 1949. When President Benson reflected upon the experiences that he had there, he said the following: I presume you have never had the great and trying experience of looking into the faces of people who are starving when you are unable to give them even a crust of bread. We faced that as we first met the saints in parts of Europe. But when the welfare supplies came, it was a time never to be forgotten by these faithful saints. I can see them now in tears, weeping like children. Now, I believe, mindful that a century earlier the prophet Joseph Smith had taught, we are to feed the hungry, to clothe the naked, to provide for the widow, to dry up the tear of the orphan, to comfort the afflicted, whether in this church or any other, or in no church at all, wherever he finds them, that the time had approached when we were going to reach beyond church membership. And that's the foundations, at least, of where we go today, as in the 1970s, the church began its first efforts, really, to reach beyond ourselves. So, Brady, if you'd come and share this next steps with them.
I was hoping that'd take a little longer, but so going off with what he said with Elder Benson, in 1975, Ezra Taft Benson Agriculture and Food Initiative was organized at Brigham Young University as part of the College of Biological and Agricultural Science. In the inaugurational quote, he says, "The Institute will be an agency of experimentation whereby the agricultural resource of the various lands can be evaluated, new technology applied, nutrition's needs studied. Then the beneficial results of this research can be implemented at the proper time through the worldwide priesthood channels of the church, correlated through the existing developing welfare service programs. In this manner, the delivery system for these programs will enjoy the effectiveness of the priesthood leadership throughout the world. The people will be taught to help themselves, and that is the vital part of God's plan." So this program, like Ostler said earlier, was developed so that they could have food production, like growing vegetables and fruits, nutrition, diet, and food storage. And in 2008, the Benson Institute was integrated into LDS Charities, which we'll talk about in a little bit. And as of this year, we already have 130 food projects worldwide, and 35,000 individuals in 16 countries have benefited just from the Benson Institute. But humanitarian aid was officially started in 1986, but before that, in 1985, because of the Ethiopia famine, Patrick Rees, who was the previous manager of planning and administration for human services and LDS Charities, explained in an interview that the church leaders asked us to hold a special fast, and the money that was collected during this time would help to provide goods that relieve suffering in Ethiopia. The amount of money raised was significant. It was actually 2 times that which was asked for. There was actually 2 collections, one that we did on our own, and again when the President Reagan asked the country to donate. From that point, the church leaders made an organization to support this kind of work, and so that's why in 1986 humanitarian aid was officially organized under the name of LDS Humanitarian Services. 10 years later, in 1996, LDS Charities was organized, and this is the humanitarian arm of the church. And Sharon Eubank, who's the director of LDS Charities today, summarized in a UN conference just the other day that the LDS Charities helps by implementing local solutions to local problems, increase knowledge, skills, and capacity of the individuals, involve beneficiaries in project design and work, and provide opportunities for people to serve. The LDS Charities is self-funded, and 85% of its donations are less than $50 a year, or less than $50, and there's only 36 paid staff members on LDS Charities. 16 of them are in Salt Lake City right now, and they're all funded by tithing. And LDS Charities, its annual budget is 2 years rotated. So for example, all the money that they're spending this year is from 2012. So moving on to the initiatives of LDS Charities, we started off with the wheelchair initiative, and This started off in 2001, but it was in a response to the 1996 through 1997 crisis in the Balkans. And Kenneth E. Baring, who was a founder of Independent Wheelchair Foundation, he said in an interview that after he sold the football team, the Seattle Seahawks, I was traveling fairly often to Africa to go hunting. LDS Philanthropies, the charitable wing of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, knew about my trips, and before one of my flights, they asked me if I could make a detour and take some canned meats to a group of refugees from the Kosovo War. When we loaded up the 15 tons of canned meat, we had some extra room. So they asked if I would take 6 wheelchairs and drop them off in Romania. And that's what we did. When we got to Romania, I helped hand out the wheelchairs, and it changed my life. So in 2001, after that experience, the church decided to partner up with the Wheelchair Foundation, and they were partners with them for 4 years, and then they decided to go on their own because they've built up enough that they can do it on their own. So, but it's good to note that in that 4 years that they were with the Wheelchair Foundation, they were able to give over 600,000 wheelchairs to individuals. And then in 2007, the church began donating 2 new styles of wheelchairs specifically made for outdoor use called Motivation and the Whirlwind Rough Rider. And today the church's wheelchair program now focuses on partnerships with local organizations and countries to provide jobs for disabled workers and to contribute to local economies. And then a year later, we have the 2002, we had neonatal recitation training initiative, which was due to there was a lack of knowledge in the 1990s on this kind of training. And so the church decided to launch a new method of training called Train the Trainer. And Patrick Reese again explains that our volunteers are doctors and nurses who have the certification to do this. About 5 of these volunteers will go into a place like Mozambique or the DRC and train 80 to 100 people and certify that they understand and can train others to learn those techniques. These 80 to 100 professionals each commit to train 6 to 8 others who are in hospitals or nurse associations. So as you can see, this kind of ripple effect would give 800 more people just training. And also, since the inception of this program, LDS Humanitarian Services has partnered with the American Academy of Pediatrics, Helping Babies Breathe Global Development Alliance, and local health organizations to develop effective training materials and methods for teaching midwives and doctors the skills needed to help newborns. It was noted in 2010 that there was 192,780 physicians, nurses, and midwives in 74 countries that were trained just from this method of training. And also in 2013, there was already 27,000 birth attendants trained, and it resulted in over 1 million lives saved. So following in 2002, we had the Clean Water Initiative. This initiative was established because the church saw that they needed a project in Laos, and they needed to expand and refurbish their existing water system. The unique thing about the Clean Water projects is all of it can only be accomplished through the local economy and through all the local villagers and people. So they are the ones who dig the holes, dig the trenches, find the water sources. They establish water communities, arrange fee-paying systems, and they're responsible for maintaining the water system. And 4 years later, in 2006, the church began providing sanitation facilities such as toilets, showers, clothes washing stations, and eventually they went into hygiene training. So by this time, now the church today calls this the 3 pillars of health. And as a result of this initiative, it was reported in 2010 that there were over 7.5 million people worldwide that received clean water in just 8 years.
Put this. I added a slide here. That's my favorite way to change slides since Brady's seen this. In speaking of just other things that aren't official initiatives of the church, many of these begin simply by having individuals who are living abroad care for babies in hospitals or in areas of need. I did this particularly. This is my wife is here on the right-hand side, and I wanted to show a picture of her for sure because it always helps me to focus on that. We're talking about real human beings, and this is herself, and on the left is Joanne Seeley. While I was teaching there in Jerusalem Center this last time, and they would take time going to the Red Crescent Hospital, where they then would just simply hold babies and feed them who had special needs. Working then with Muslim communities, which has been more recent as we've been aiding them. Don't have photographs that have permission to show of what's been happening in Jordan. We have over 1 million refugees that come from Syria, and the church has become very involved in providing medical care for them. I thought it was of interest here. Maybe if you can see, there's very few names here that are not in Arabic with the Red Crescent Hospital. If you look down in the middle column toward the bottom, you'll notice they do mention the Latter-day Saint Church Mormons, and recognizing the good that we've done with them. Also with the wheelchair initiative, it wasn't that long ago that we were in the old city buying spices, and we'd been there with one of the store owners often, and finally he was asking, "Who are you? You're always here and you're buying from us." And as we began to explain who we were interrupted by another customer that was there with the owner, and he said, "These are good people. Don't you know who they are? These are the Mormons. These are the people I work with. They're the ones that have been providing the aid with all the wheelchairs that I provided to the Palestinian people." And so it's hard to keep up with where we become worldwide. It was much easier in church history. We had a storehouse or two. But in addition to the official initiatives, there are millions of Latter-day Saints who are reaching out in similar ways to what we have here.
So speaking about the official initiatives, there were 4 official initiatives that occurred in 2003 by the LDS General Welfare Committee. And the 3 initiatives that we already talked about were wheelchairs, neonatal, and clean water. And the 4th one was vision care. The unique thing about this was it was a request from a local church leader who saw the need to address that there needed to be preventable blindness procedures in Indonesia. So for that purpose, they created the means to help over 300 million individuals who suffer from poor vision quality. And from 2003 to 2010, there was roughly 550,000 individuals that received improved sight from the help of the church. Patrick Reese also reported that the Vision Care Initiative has since developed into a program in which the U.S. doctors and local eye care professionals collaborate to alleviate special and most needed eye care problems in a community. 88,000 people benefited from equipment donations and collaboration efforts of the church in 2013 alone. So also in 2003, we had the Ethiopia porridge called Otmit that was created. It was developed in response to the 1985 Ethiopia famine. And if you guys don't know what Otmit is, it's a porridge consisting of oat flour, powdered skim milk, and sugar fortified with a vitamin and mineral supplement. It was developed as a response, like I said, in 1985 to the Ethiopian famine. And in March 2003, the church sent its first shipment to Ethiopia, and that shipment consisted of 80,000 pounds of the mixture, while an additional 120 tons were being produced right here in Welfare Square in Salt Lake City. It was reported that in 2008 that more than 7.7 million pounds of Otmit was manufactured on Welfare Square and delivered to countries such as Ethiopia, Uganda, Sudan, and many others. And then our last major initiative was also created in 2003, and it was immunizations and their measles campaigns. The amount of interest in immunization and vaccinations generated by the church was mainly due to the partnerships that the church was in. Most notably was the Red Cross, who was led by the Center of Disease Control and Prevention in the United Nations. Furthermore, the church committed their commitment of $1 million a year just for vaccinations also supported new efforts for measles and Rubella initiatives in the United Nations. And now we are helping provide immunizations for retrovirus, pneumococcal, and polio vaccines. It's been reported in 2004 through 2010 that 692,000 hours of service were provided for more than 600 million children and youth, and they've all received these kinds of vaccines. And in 2013 alone, the church's commitment to immunizations has contributed to 9.9 million people being immunized. So now Ostler is going to talk about our conclusion.
Trying to watch out of the corner of my eye so we don't go over. They said we have. Just very quickly, I think what we're mostly known for is emergency response. Just a fast, if we can, overview of what takes place. I would suggest that it's possible around the world that what once was the icon of Mormondom, which was the Salt Lake Temple, is quickly being replaced by a yellow vest that people go around with, Mormon helping hands, that we're known for emergency response. But there's been some development in this too I thought might be of great interest to you. One is, in addition to the many thousands of people who show up and then tears roll down cheeks when they say the Mormons are here, we're okay, is that we had developed a box that contained the exact same amount of foodstuffs that we could ship around the world. So that when it would go through customs, they could open one box up and we could guarantee them that every box looked the same. That way they didn't have to open every box up. They could just randomly check and they would know. More recently, they have determined that the people would rather have food that's produced in their own country that they're familiar with. And so that has ceased as we find that the church is meeting the needs with the type of commodities that people would be more readily accepting. Now that was a major change. We've seen that where many of Latter-day Saints here in the Wasatch Front, the United States, gained great comfort and think they're providing humanitarian aid to people all over the world. Now we're giving that to everyone around the world. In addition, just by giving you an idea of the amount of money that's been spent, as of 2011, you'll notice that year alone, if we times this by 1 million, it's over $1 billion or $1.4 billion between cash and materials just in that 1 year alone that we've been able to provide to people of the world. A far cry from a small little part of the Noel K. Whitney store. But I can't help but see the Lord's hand in preparing us. What a day to live. I'm an expert on the last days. I have lived my entire life in the last days. And I can't think of a more exciting time to be alive. Notice this is just giving us a little chart of the many things, the many projects worldwide. You'll notice that in our chart, nearly 3,500 projects in hospitals and clinics alone. Because of time, I won't go through this much more, but just give you one more wrap up here so you understand how we reach this. We mentioned there's 36 full-time people working for the church. The church is divided into 10 areas just within the United States. All of them are looked over from Salt Lake City themselves. 15 international areas. You can see just kind of organization-wise under the direction of the First Presidency. Each area of the church has an area presidency of the 70 and an area welfare manager. Then what we might refer to as service missionaries are called humanitarian full-time volunteers who work with stake presidents. So whenever there's a need, there's a budget, as we've made mention of. They can request for their needs locally. Most often it's the money that is given so they can buy the commodities in the area that they're in. And worldwide, interesting enough with our particular session, 27% of the projects are in the East European area. Now that'd be of interest to you just to put this with you who've been working with Latvia and, as you mentioned, Estonia and Lithuania. Last of all, to end, from President Hinckley some years ago. From the beginning, this church has moved forward with faith. Faith was the strength of the prophet Joseph Smith, and so it has been with each of the presidents of the church. In the face of terrible opposition, they've moved forward with faith. More recently, whether it was the urgent need to extend humanitarian aid to victims of the tsunami or earthquakes or floods in diverse places, it has all been the same. Welfare shelves have been emptied. Cash by the millions has been dispatched to those in need, regardless of church membership all in faith. We'll continue to go forth praying that as Elijah and the widow of Sarepta, that as we give to those in need, we'll continue to see that our shelves are replenished, would be our prayer. Thank you.